In the late 19th century, wealth did not run. It sat upright. It breathed through lace. It moved across marble floors only after a footman pronounced the correct family name at the entrance of a ballroom. Inside the mansions of New York and Newport, women wore diamonds heavy enough to become architecture, yet their bodies were managed like family property. They were taught how to stand, how to smile, how to remain silent, how to marry, how to produce heirs, and how to suffer without disturbing dinner. Money was not freedom. Money was a locked room with more expensive wallpaper. 40 years later, the daughters born from that system began breaking the furniture. They cut their hair short, raised their hemlines, drove too fast, smoked in public, drank illegal liquor during Prohibition, and laughed as if laughter itself were a criminal act. The women of the Gilded Age had turned femininity into a fortress. The flappers turned femininity into a fuse. This is not merely a story about changing fashion. It is the story of how extreme wealth mutated the psychology of American women across 2 generations. The Gilded Age heiress was trapped inside a velvet contract. The roaring 20s heiress believed she had escaped, only to discover the cage had learned how to dance to jazz. The prison changed costumes. The sentence remained. At the center of late 19th century New York stood Caroline Webster Schermerhorn Astor, born in 1830, remembered not as one Mrs. Astor, but as the Mrs. Astor. She needed no formal office. She possessed something more efficient, the power to decide who existed inside high society. Alongside Ward McAllister, she helped control the mythology of the 400, the supposedly select circle that could fit inside her ballroom. When McAllister's list appeared in the press in 1892, America received an unpleasant reminder. This republic had a royal court, only the throne had been moved into a drawing room. Caroline Astor's cruelty did not require shouting. It was more sophisticated than that. An invitation could simply never arrive. A young woman could be seated too far from the hostess. A family could appear less often in the society pages, then slowly vanish from the map of power. This was social violence performed as etiquette. No blood appeared on the carpet. Only reputation was drained from the body. Alva Vanderbilt understood the insult. The Vanderbilt family had railroad money, industrial money, new American money, but to Caroline Astor's older circle, new money still smelled faintly of machinery. So Alva answered with architecture. Marble House, built for Alva and William Kissam Vanderbilt between 1888 and 1892, cost roughly $11 million, a sum large enough to turn a residence into an act of war. It was not a home. It was a marble cannon aimed at the gates of old society. In that world, rich daughters were not raised to be happy. They were raised to connect assets. A marriage could launder new money, purchase old blood, rescue a decaying English estate, or raise an American family's position inside an invisible ranking system. Love was a decorative detail. Genealogy was the main contract. They called it a wedding. Structurally, it was a corporate merger with white flowers. The coldest case was Consuelo Vanderbilt. On November 6, 1895, she married Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough, at St. Thomas Church in Manhattan, Dr. In the newspapers, it appeared as a fairy tale wedding. In practice, it was a wire transfer wearing a bridal veil. The Marlborough family had a title, Blenheim Palace, and catastrophic maintenance costs. The Vanderbilts had cash. Consuelo had a body, youth, and a surname new enough to require aristocratic polishing. These marriages produced the figure known as the Dollar Princess, the wealthy American girl exchanged for European rank. Jenny Jerome married Lord Randolph Churchill in 1874 and gave birth to Winston Churchill. Mary Leiter became Lady Curzon, wife of a Viceroy of India. Consuelo Vanderbilt became Duchess of Marlborough. On the surface, they entered palaces. Beneath it, they were packaged as transatlantic capital. Their psychology was crushed by polite instruments. They were not allowed to call themselves victims, because poor victims are easier to pity. A suffering rich woman was accused of ingratitude. If she cried, she had weak nerves. If she resisted, she was selfish. If she submitted, she was well-bred. The system was perfect because it made the imprisoned woman feel ashamed for wanting the key. Caroline Astor did not simply manage dinner parties. She managed fear. She turned women into load-bearing columns for an entire social structure, then called their stillness dignity. Every waltz reinforced hierarchy. Every waltz reinforced hierarchy. Every visit functioned as background screen. Every smile across the dining table became a compliance report. But as the 19th century closed, the velvet cages began to bleed. The daughters born inside this restraint saw what their mothers could not say aloud. If obedience only led to a life of being purchased, then rebellion at least offered the sensation of being alive. When the next generation reached adulthood, they did not ask permission to open the door. They decided to burn the corridor down. The first woman to strike the match did not emerge from an English castle. She emerged from the American South, armed with lipstick, alcohol, performance, and an appetite for destruction that the new century mistook for glamour. Her name was Zelda. After this break, the ballroom becomes a jazz club, and the girls once trained to remain silent begin screaming with their entire bodies. Zelda Sire was born in 1900 in Montgomery, Alabama, the daughter of an Alabama Supreme Court justice. She was not Consuelo Vanderbilt, but she represented what the old order feared most, a girl educated enough to understand the rules, beautiful enough to be forgiven, and reckless enough to break those rules in front of the men who wrote them. When Zelda married F. Scott Fitzgerald in 1920, they became the public emblem of the jazz age. Public saw light. Very few noticed the fuel burning underneath. After World War I, America had less patience for old rituals. Soldiers returned. Cities accelerated. Credit expanded. Automobiles moved women beyond the surveillance radius of the parlor. Prohibition outlawed alcohol, then accidentally turned drinking into a declaration of independence. Jazz changed the rhythm of the body. Cinema converted rebellion into a mass-market face. The flapper was not just a dress style. She was a silk indictment of every corseted mother before her. They cut their hair because long hair had become a symbol of supervision. They smoked because the smoke drifted directly into the face of old morality. They drank because the law told them not to. They drove because private movement was power. Each gesture looked like pleasure, but beneath it sat a logic of revenge. The previous generation had been displayed as property. This generation displayed itself as a weapon. Clara Bow, born in Brooklyn in 1905, became the kitsch girl after the 1927 film It. She was not born into old money, which made her more dangerous to the old order. She proved that the flapper image no longer belonged only to rich girls in expensive hotels. A secretary, a shop girl, or a working-class daughter could learn the walk, the stare, the smile, and the refusal. Once style escaped the mansion, class lost control of its own uniform. F. Scott Fitzgerald understood the poison of rich women because he was haunted by them. Ginevra King, the wealthy Chicago girl he once loved, is often seen as one of the inspirations behind Daisy Buchanan in The Great Gatsby. Daisy is not merely beautiful and spoiled. She is consequence-proof privilege made human. She has been shielded from accountability for so long that her emptiness becomes lethal. This is the dark center of the roaring 20s. Rebellion was real, but the market devoured it quickly. A woman escaped the parlor and stepped into the nightclub, only to discover that the nightclub had rules, men watching, reporters waiting, photographers circling, and prices of its own. The corset disappeared. The gaze remained. The cage was not destroyed. It was fitted with live music. Then Barbara Hutton appeared like the autopsy report of the entire dream. Born in 1912, granddaughter of retail magnate Frank W. Woolworth, she inherited one of the largest fortunes in America. Her mother, Edna Woolworth Hutton, died in 1917 when Barbara was only 4. Accounts of her life became attached to the image of a child discovering her mother's body, turned the nickname, "Poor Little Rich Girl," into less of a headline and more of a curse. In 1930, during the Great Depression, Barbara Hutton was introduced to society through a debutante ball so lavish it nearly insulted the entire country. While millions of Americans lost work, a rich girl was wrapped in flowers, music, crystal, and society coverage. The issue is not that Barbara was guilty of wealth. The issue was that society placed her on an altar precisely when the altar began to resemble a crime scene. Hutton's later life, marked by multiple marriages, addiction, exploitation, loneliness, and collapse, revealed what the Gilded Age had tried to hide. A fortune can buy distance from ordinary suffering, but it cannot buy a self strong enough to survive being treated as an asset. Women like Hutton did not merely spend money. They were consumed by the mythology of money itself. The roaring 20s were sold as liberation, and part of that liberation was real. Women gained the vote after the 19th Amendment in 1920. They appeared more visibly in offices, cinemas, streets, automobiles, and public life. But among wealthy women, freedom often became another performance. The mother had been forced to represent order. The daughter was encouraged to represent pleasure. Neither was allowed simply to be human. By 1929, the market crash did not create the emptiness. It audited the emptiness already present. The party did not end because morality returned. It ended because the bill arrived. Families that had used daughters to purchase rank, then used daughters to sell rebellion, eventually faced the same fact. No inheritance is large enough to replace a soul managed from childhood. Across 2 generations, the rich woman was never simply rich. She became a container for male ambition, family anxiety, national fantasy, and class insecurity. In the 19th century, she had to keep the facade from cracking. In the 1920s, she was permitted to burn as long as the flame remained beautiful enough to sell. One system demanded obedience. The next demanded allure. Both were forms of consumption. Caroline Astor and the flappers of the Jazz Age appear to stand at opposite ends of history. One wore diamonds like armor. The other wore rebellion like perfume. Yet both were caught inside the old curse of inherited money. It turned women into public property while claiming to protect them from the public. That is old money's most elegant fraud. It builds a palace around a person, then sells tickets to the view. The question is not whether money made them miserable. That is too easy, and easy history is just decoration. The real question is whether any human being can remain intact after being raised as an asset, displayed as a trophy, desired as proof, and mourned only when the performance becomes too expensive to maintain. The next time a dynasty sells you elegance, look beneath the silk. Look for the invoice. Look for the daughter standing at the center of the room, smiling because her collapse has not yet been scheduled. This archive is not closed. Subscribe and follow the next portrait before the family edits it into legend.